Hey there, Wildly Better gang. Say this word with me: transient hypofrontality. Transient hypofrontality. There's a conversation starter, isn't it? What is transient hypofrontality? Well, we're going to break it down in just a minute, but it is what happens when you drop into flow. The guy to first talk about and use this term is Dr. Arne Dietrich. He teaches at the American University in Beirut, one of the great neuroscientists of our time. And what they found out was when you and I get outside of our prefrontal cortex, certain things begin to happen in the rest of our brain. So what is transient hypofrontality? Transient means it's fleeting, it's transient, it's moving, it doesn't stick around. Hypo means less than, right? Hypothyroidism means the thyroid is operating less than optimally. It's putting out less than it's supposed to. And then frontality is the prefrontal cortex. When you and I are in high problem solving mode, or when we're playing a very competitive team sport where we've got to constantly make calculations and think, we are activating the prefrontal cortex of our mind where our identity sits, where we solve problems, and where high analysis happens. But something happens when we start to disengage that part of our brain. How many of you take nature walks or go running and experience the runner's high? How many of you ride motorcycles or do the kinds of things where you start to disengage your brain and you sort of get lost in the environment, and you simultaneously find out you're super creative, that you're solving problems you couldn't solve sitting at your desk, really digging in and gritting your teeth and trying to make it happen? Why can you solve those out on a jog? Why can you solve those when you're out riding a motorcycle through the mountains? Why is it when you're on a nature walk surrounded by nature, all of a sudden you get uber creative, or your problem solving skills seem to go off the chart? It's because of what Dr. Dietrich calls transient hypofrontality. You start to disengage this, you start to immerse in another world, and action and attention start to come together, and you're no longer in analysis mode, you're open. And what happens in transient hypofrontality, what happens when that chemical cocktail gets going, is disparate parts of the brain start connecting things you couldn't connect before when you were in analysis mode. This is an incredibly potent realization that as we learn more about flow, you will experience this more and more. So one of the things I want to do is I want to help you actually experience something like this if you don't know how to get into it yourself. So how many of you, as you're waking up in the morning, have these brilliant insights or these creative thoughts, or maybe drifting off to sleep at night, you have the same ideas happen? Well, what's happening there is your brain is going from alpha to beta to theta brain waves, and in this state of being, our brains are slowing down and we're experiencing a similar sort of transient hypofrontality. And what happens there is we have lots of connections happening. The unconscious mind is starting to come to the surface, and we're starting to be creative in ways we couldn't when we were fully awake and in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. Now, this is what's interesting. People like Einstein, people like the great painter Salvador Dali, they actually did things to get into that state in between awake or sleeping, and then to wake themselves up when they were just getting ready to fall asleep, so that the problem they were trying to solve or the creative idea they were trying to germinate would happen. You know what happened? Einstein would lean back in his desk chair and he would begin to doze off, and right as he would begin to doze off, many of us have done this before, right? He would jolt because he didn't want to fall backwards, and he would come out of that space, and he would often have tremendous insights. He used to talk about this. Salvador Dali would sit in a chair with his palms down, holding a marble in one hand, and as he would begin to doze off, he would relax his hand and the marble would hit the floor, and it would jar him awake, and he would have creative insights and visions that he wouldn't have normally. So here's what I want you to do to experience this sort of thing. Tonight when you're getting ready to go to bed, I want you to think about a problem you're creatively trying to solve. And I want you to see what happens as you drift off to sleep and as you wake up in the morning. And do it for the next 5 days with the same problem until something emerges. I want you to experience this. You actually can program this to happen in your life. Now, let me give you a warning. How many of you have had creative insights in that space between awake and sleeping or sleeping and awake, but then when you fully became awake, you couldn't remember the insight, and it might have only been just a couple minutes earlier? That is because it was the unconscious mind doing the work, and once your conscious mind took over, it had absolutely no recollection of the information because it wasn't in the conscious mind. So here's the rule. Go to bed, program yourself to say, let's creatively solve this tonight. And then if you have a creative insight as you drift off to sleep, instantly wake yourself. You're doing lucid work there. Wake yourself and record the thought. I hope this is helpful. This is Wildly Better Stuff, gang. We'll continue next week.